The mayoral election is just days away in Minneapolis, and more than a dozen people are vying for the city's top spot. 4 of the frontrunners took part in a debate earlier this week. The topic of police reform took center stage, with crime on the rise in the city. In this election, voters will not only decide on who will be mayor, but also if the police force should be replaced with a public safety agency. Joining us now to talk more about that debate and the candidates is CBSN Minnesota political reporter Caroline Cummings. Caroline, thank you very much for joining us. You were one of the moderators of this debate. What stood out to you?
Good morning, guys. Thanks so much for having me. So the debate really is centered on that policing issue. And I think that that's what stood out to me the most, is that these top 4 contenders for mayor, Sheila Nejad, Kate Knuth, AJ Awed, and incumbent mayor Jacob Frey, are really divided on the police question. Jacob Frey and AJ Awed are against the police ballot question, while Sheila Nejad and Kate Knuth are supportive of it, saying that we need to overhaul policing and kind of start over. So those 4 being so divided on the issue is kind of illustrative of what the city is facing right now, the people who want to perhaps keep the police department and reform it as it is, and those who say that, like I said, need to start all over. Also, incumbent mayor Jacob Frey took a lot of attacks from his opponents, and naturally an incumbent would, but he's in an interesting position because he's been the mayor over the time of unrest and George Floyd's murder. He was the leader of the police department during that time, and also the pandemic that happened concurrently. So it's an interesting state of affairs, right? It's a kind of a little bit of a anyone but Jacob Frey, so some of the opponents say, whereas the opponents and the candidates themselves are divided on the police ballot issue, which might be a wedge issue for some voters.
So let us talk about that hot button issue. It's a ballot question number 2. And it asks if the city's police force should be replaced with a Department of Public Service, a Department of Public Safety department. So listen, you mentioned that candidates are sort of split on that. I want to play some sound.
I favor a both-and approach, which means yes, deep-seated accountability. Yes, a full structure change. Safety beyond policing, and importantly, we also need police. And right now we have fewer officers per capita than just about any major city in the entire country.
If you want to de-escalate a gathering, make sure people have a place to go, to the bathroom. And that's how we create spaces where people can breathe together, right? I would also provide free counseling in park buildings and schools across the city.
The first priority for the next mayor, any mayor, should be getting more officers out on the streets. And that's exactly what I plan to do. And the reason why I think I'm the best person suited to do that job is because I think I have the credibility in communities of color to really have them be empowered to raise their hands. Also really enlist people to, be in service for community.
I have put forward a bold, courageous plan to transform policing and build community safety. And I think Minneapolis voters should really be focused on the record of the last 4 years, and especially the last year and a half, where Mayor Frey has literally seen officers hunting people in our city and has not yet created accountability within the MPD.
All right, so the wording of this question was kind of hotly debated. And, as I'm looking at sort of the media coverage and, the way people read nowadays, often they read the headline and they don't read the body, and you see, defund the police, or voters will have to decide whether or not to replace the police department. And I'm wondering, are voters clear on what this measure means? And it also sounds like, it's one thing to vote yes or no on it, but the practical working, the way it will actually work out in the city, I suppose that still needs to be hashed out. So do voters know actually what they're voting for or against?
So opponents would argue that the language is anything but clear, and that's why this very question and the language surrounding the question ended up in court. But ultimately, what's on the ballot for voters on Tuesday, and those who've already voted in early voting was approved or said okay by the state Supreme Court. So the question stands now to the point about what they're voting on. So the question makes no mention of defund the police, though the defund the police argument perhaps started here in Minneapolis, where George Floyd was murdered last summer. It would replace the current police department with a Department of Public Safety that supporters of the amendment say would basically just take a bigger, more holistic, comprehensive public safety approach that involves a public health approach, in their words, to public safety. Now, the actual plan of what that Department of Public Safety looks like will be in the works if this should pass. There was a city memo sent out about kind of what does Minneapolis look like on November 3rd should this amendment get passed. And it's clear that the police will still have their jobs and that this charter language, so what we're talking about is changing basically the city's constitution to remove the police department and the requirement to have a certain amount of officers relative to the population. This amendment would take that language out and in turn replace it with this Department of Public Safety, which supporters and the language says could include police officers. We just don't know what that might look like. And at least on November 3rd, should this pass, police officers would still have their jobs, and that this actual language to the city charter, that's the nexus of the heart of the amendment, wouldn't take effect for 30 days. So there's kind of that window to hash out more of those details.
So Caroline, there's a question on the ballot, which is what people are calling the strong mayor ballot question. What is that, and where do each of the candidates stand on that issue?
So the fault line for police, Sheila Azad and Kate Knuth, perhaps the more progressive candidates in the mix, and AJ Awed and Jacob Fry are supportive of the question, and then the two, Kate Knuth and Sheila Azad, are against the question. So the policing issue, it's the same, and the nature of the question is that it would change Minneapolis's current city government structure, which is unlike most cities in the nation, where the city council and the mayor effectively share a lot of powers, and it would shift more powers to the mayor's office and explicitly define him as the chief executive of the city and the council as the legislative body. Supporters of this change say it would make clear lines of accountability, make government run more efficiently, as the city has dealt with some department heads who told some members who drafted this language that it's sometimes unclear who is in charge. Whereas opponents of this change say it puts far too much power in the mayor's office, and that the mayor already retains a lot of power at this moment. He has the power to veto what the council puts forward. He also has sole control of the Minneapolis Police Department. So the issue rests in this power structure and how much power should this mayor of Minneapolis have. And like I said, the top four contenders in this race, of course, there's almost 24 actually running, but the top four are split down the middle, and that split mirrors their split on the policing issue.
Yeah, people in Minneapolis have a lot of different candidates to choose from. I know that early voting has already begun, or began back in September. Do we know how that's impacted the voter turnout?
So at least right now, early votes are nearly double what they were 4 years ago, in the 2017 race for mayor. So right there, you're seeing more people voting early now. It's unclear if that's driven by people's real enthusiasm to vote for or against the policing question or any other questions on the ballot. But the numbers are clear that, more than 20,000 people have voted early already, compared to over 11,000 in 2017. And all of this is in the context of how much money that has been pouring into this race. The two lead PACs on either side of the policing issue are just getting so much money, in excess of $3 million total, in an effort to get out there, put out campaign flyers to get voters to vote the way that they'd like to see that police question go.
Well, Caroline Cummings, I think the whole country is going to be watching your city, particularly when it comes to that second question on the ballot. I don't think a question like that has been put to voters before. Determine how you want your city to be policed. So we'll be watching closely. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for having me.
You can continue to follow the story on CBSN Minnesota. All you have to do is download the free CBS News app or head on over to cbsnews.com/live. There you can find all of our CBSN local streams.